Welcome to Baltic World. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
And it's our week in review. Baltic World, we discuss important issues and international affairs affecting Northern, Central, and Eastern Europe. But first, how are you, Crispin?
I'm marvellous, I think.
You think?
Yeah, well, I'm suffering a little bit because my friend had a birthday party, and to celebrate, because he's got the biggest wine collection of any of the friends that I have. So, and his wife only allows him to have a certain number of wine bottles, and he's already ordered like the next load.
Oh my God.
He had to offload, let's say, and so we all came and helped out. Suffering a little bit from that, but otherwise, doing pretty well.
Like, you're not young anymore. You can't just bounce back after having,
Look, I mean, Charlene likes to needle me a lot, but it is actually true. Like as you get older, your tolerance for hangovers and things like that becomes greatly diminished. Like I remember when I was 18, and I would drink, and then by 7 o'clock the next morning, like no matter how much I drank the night before, I'd be like, yep, ready to face the day, like no trouble at all.
That is true.
But now, not like that anymore.
Yeah, I had 6 or 7 drinks, and like when I was 18. I mean, I'm still young, but like, yeah, like I would be like, oh, I'd be completely smashed, but I'm like, oh, I'm going to the gym now. Like, I didn't feel it.
That's right. So, all right, look, I don't recommend it. I'm very much on the whole never drink again kind of bandwagon at this time of the day.
Of 1 week.
No. Of 1 week, yeah. But otherwise life is good. Work is going well. It's a new role. The channel has been fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to travel again and get up there. I've already started planning our kind of trip, so we will, once Australia borders are really restricted at the moment. Once the borders have opened up and we can plan our journey, I will let audience know ahead of time. We'll probably do like 1 or 2 public events in each city, so anyone who watches the channel can come along and hang out with us. And we will also take a lot of footage as we travel through. So really looking forward to that, but it's still probably not going to be till spring next year up in the Northern Hemisphere, simply because we've got such draconian travel restrictions here in Australia.
Like, I think it's easy to get out of Australia. It's just really hard to get back into Australia. Certain states have like multiple like steps.
That's right. Yeah, we're not. You have to say that you're moving out of the country permanently, and you're not allowed back into the country for like 6 months or something like that. So it's pretty serious. But hopefully, with vaccinations and everything, we are, fingers crossed, going to be allowed to become a normal country again. Yeah. What about you?
What's new with me? Oh, I had grand final. So we had the grand final, and
Explain what the grand final is, because they would never have heard of it.
That's true. Okay, so we have Australian football. It's different to American football.
Not soccer. This is a specific, Australian rules football is a sport that in sort of the 1800s, people observed some Aboriginals kicking around a ball. They adapted that to an Australian kind of football game where it's a contact sport where people try and kick goals essentially, and they run around, they catch the ball, they pass it to one another, and they try and get down together in the field, in a nutshell.
Yeah, you can handball and you can kick. And you have like you have goalposts essentially. Yeah.
It's a very high scoring game.
It is, and it's a huge thing in Australia. It's kind of like Lithuanian basketball. Like, if you don't watch footy, then it's kind of like, are you Australian? Even me, because like I'm not really into footy as much, but the grand final is just amazing to watch. And for the first time, the grand final didn't occur in Melbourne. So it's a Melbourne sport, really, right?
It was founded in Victoria. So for many decades, they just had the VFL, Victorian Football League, and then as the other states adopted it, it became the Australian Football League. And as Charlene says, every year the grand final is held at the Melbourne Cricket Ground.
MCG.
But because of their restrictions right now, it was shipped to Perth.
Yeah.
which has far fewer restrictions. So that was interesting.
Yeah, interesting. So on the other half of the country,
Mm.
and it was actually Melbourne teams that were in the grand final, which is cool. And what I've heard was tickets sold out in like 10 minutes for it, but it was spectacular. So yeah, really great game. I didn't get on the drinks. I was being responsible, had a nice dinner, but it was good. Just making Crispin feel bad. That's my role here. So, speaking of borders, this week we discussed the Baltic Migration Crisis. So things have escalated a bit. Well, has it? I don't know.
That's right. Well, so during last year, all of 2020, about something like 80 to 100 people arrived in Lithuania from other parts of the world claiming asylum in the European Union. And in the last 2 months, there was something like 4,000, 5,000 people coming across the border from Belarus. So for those that didn't watch the video, Lukashenko is flying in plane loads of people from Turkey in particular, but other places as well, and dumping them on the border with Lithuania.
I'm missing something crucial. What's his motivation? Just to aggravate?
Well, essentially, it's, the Europeans are calling it like hybrid kind of conflict. But basically, the European Union is putting a lot of sanctions on the Lukashenko regime. They're not recognizing his government. They're recognizing that of the opposition, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya.
Yes.
She is in exile in Vilnius across the border in Lithuania, so kind of setting up a shadow government. And it's the hostility that exists between Belarus and Lithuania, which is motivating him to do this. Knowing that, first of all, it creates a great administrative burden on Lithuania because although migrants may continue to travel, they'll initially be processed in Lithuania. It requires resource requirements to put more restrictions on the border.
Yeah.
It also creates tension within the EU because there'll be some countries that welcome the migrants, there'll be some countries that want to throw them out straight away. And so there's a lot of legal complexity for the EU. So it's not the best response that they have is to secure the border so people can stop coming over in the first place.
Yeah.
And
then puts administrative burden on Belarus.
Well, yeah, the Lukashenko will stop doing it if no one's crossing the border successfully, and all the people are swelling in Belarus. Well, then he'll stop shipping them over. But while people are still successfully crossing the border into the European Union via Lithuania, he will continue to do that because there's not much repercussions blowing back on him at the moment.
So I have a comment here by Serena's Tumas, and they say crucial detail you got wrong is the migrant integration issues in Lithuania. If those migrants get released or they flood Lithuania, most of them will leave for Germany or Sweden. So Lithuania probably will not be affected that badly by the migrants.
Okay, so it's a great point. It's true that people that are coming into Lithuania, I think Lithuania is a great country, promoting it to the rest of the world, but most people don't know much about Lithuania. So if you're in the Middle East somewhere and you're trying to get to Europe, Lithuania is not the destination that you're necessarily thinking of. Nevertheless, there's a couple of things I would say to that. One, it's not entirely clear people can go from Lithuania to other places. Is Poland really going to allow all these people to trush across their territory to get to Germany? I don't think that's the case. I think that the Poles will just throw them straight back out. The getting to Sweden is no longer as easy as it once was.
I know they're sending a lot of migrants back, like thousands.
Yes. So although the migrants themselves may intend to go to other places beyond Lithuania, they may not be able to. They may end up being stuck in Lithuania because the other European countries are becoming more and more strict on their borders and their border security. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, even if that is true, and I think you're absolutely right that that's not where these people seek to stay, they still have to be processed and administered mostly in Lithuania until such time as they find a way to get out and go somewhere else. Finding out who they are, doing security checks, housing them, all of that burden is going to fall upon the Lithuanians until such time as that occurs. And if the numbers continue to grow, the small proportion, let's look at that figure I gave you before, 100 in all of 2020 and like 5,000 in the last 2 months. if that continues,
Mm.
that even if a small proportion remain in Lithuania, then that is still a huge burden and sort of dilution of Lithuanian culture and way of life. So remembering that Lithuania has fewer than 3 million people total. Also, the demographic change becomes quite stark for Lithuania because Lithuania is an older population. A lot of the young people have already moved to other parts of Europe. So since the vast majority of these migrants are people in their 20s and early 30s, mostly young men, that will affect disproportionately the greatest shrinking demographic in Lithuania. So you are right to point out that they're not all coming to Lithuania to stay in Lithuania, but just the sheer numbers, the border security of other countries, the increasing restrictions, the increasing tension, and all of that means it's still going to be a huge burden for Lithuania in particular, much more so than it would be for Portugal.
And you have a lot of foreign migrants. Like you can't expect these migrants to, change their own culture. You'd expect the culture of the country would change.
Well, that's what's being proven to be the case. There is a kind of weird thing that the Europeans are saying, and particularly I find this true in London and Sadiq Khan and people like that, saying, "Oh, diversity is our strength, more diversity." And what is never expressed is, okay, is it always more diversity is always better? At what point does diversity become a problem? Like, is there a limit to the amount of diversity? How do we measure this diversity as our strength kind of thing? Like, how much strength is it giving us? Like, in what ways? Are there any drawbacks to this? People aren't analysing this in a critical way. They're looking at it in terms of their ideology.
Like inclusion and everybody is welcome, but...
That's exactly right.
Are all ideas welcome?
You make a fantastic point. Now, there is I'm sure that for most immigrant societies, so for the United States and Australia in particular, a certain degree of migration from most places in the world up to a certain limit is a net benefit. That is, they add to the diversity of food and language and perspective and sport and art and all of those sorts of things.
Open up new economies.
Yeah, for example, we have a relatively small population of people from East Africa in Australia. They're also our best long distance runners, right? So there is an advantage, okay, to
we need your legs.
Yeah, no, but that's the thing. Like, there is an advantage so long as they can be subsumed into the broader Australian kind of culture, right? And that means there has to be a limit on their numbers relative to how far away their natural culture is from normal Australian values.
But it's interesting because Australia is like a melting pot of cultures that I think we had this discussion way early on, but how within households people retain their culture. But then suddenly when you leave your house, you kind of adopt the Australian culture.
True.
And it's shared.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why Australia has over 200 languages spoken every day. And we are, I think, the most successful immigrant society on earth. Okay, and one of the reasons for that is people don't bring their baggage when they come over here. If they have a long-standing animosity between the Greeks and the Turks, they tend not to bring that to Australia when they come here. They'll be friends with their Greek and Turk friends. They'll maintain their as you say the private household culture, but then that becomes unique, special. It doesn't generate conflict. Now that's not to say it's perfect or that it all works, but most of the time it does. There is a difference between us and Europe, though. And the big difference is this. Europe, if you have immigrants coming in from other places, you're displacing the indigenous population. So when we are talking about like Lithuania, the Lithuanians have been living there for thousands of years. It's their country. They've been there forever. Whereas Australia, unless you're an Aboriginal person, you've been here less than a couple hundred years, and so the entire identity, as long as you kind of agree on some base principles, we really don't care if things change a bit, right? Things are changing, and I think some things have changed dramatically in a positive sense. So for a while there, we had a very much an Anglo-Saxon focus, part of the British Empire, very much focused on the sort of Protestant England role model. And then when the Second World War ended, we had a huge flood of migrants from Southern and Eastern Europe in particular to work on our massive infrastructure projects, the Snowy Mountain Scheme, things like that. So you had a lot of Greeks and Italians. So Australia is now renowned for having the best coffee in the world.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, best.
It's a well-founded reputation. We absolutely do. The more I travel overseas, and I don't care where I go, the more I realize that Australian coffee is something else, okay? And the reason for that is we have all these cafe strips and everything brought in by these immigrants after World War II. We're the only country in the world where Starbucks failed. Why? Because we have better coffee at a cheaper price. Australia has been good at absorbing it, but there's been the other thing as well. So one is the indigenous population in Europe. The other is the control of the numbers. Australia has the strictest border security regime in the entire face of the world. And in fact, many people, human white groups and things like that, they criticize Australia for our border, kind of rules, but rigidly enforced, they do serve to deter potential people smugglers. So, for example, during 2009, 10, 11, 12, we had tens of thousands of people flooding our borders every year from just rickety boats making the journey across the Indian Ocean. And many people dying en route. There was one huge tragedy where I think 60 people died trying to reach Christmas Island, all within eyeshot of the island. So everyone, it was all filmed, people just drowning at sea. But we introduced a regime that comprised multiple different aspects. One was if you arrived in Australia by boat, you would never be able to settle here. 2, offshore processing. If you arrive in Australia, you get sent to some island in the middle of the Pacific. We process there. And 3rd, if your boat was seaworthy, the Navy would just push you back to wherever you came from. So
it kind of benefits that we are an island, that we can have those kind of border restrictions, more than offence.
That's true. But and the Brits are trying very hard to deal with that right now as well, because they're also an island country, and they look at Australia with absolute envy because they are still getting tens of thousands of migrants crossing the English Channel. So they're looking at doing something similar. Now, a lot of people criticise this because people get sent to offshore processing facilities and stay there forever until they decide to go home. Okay,
it is a human rights issue, right?
It is, but it has worked in the sense that there aren't that many people in detention anymore because people stopped coming. And Australia has one of the most generous refugee intakes in the world per capita. So although we don't accept anyone coming in by boat via people smugglers, we still go to refugee camps around the world and pick people up and bring them to Australia, tens of thousands a year. But we choose families. We find women and children, we find, people with skills and people who have left terrible war zones who don't have the means to travel 15 countries to arrive to Australia. And so, it has worked for us.
I guess there is 2 sides of the equation, right? If you do let illegal migrants come in, essentially then those people that are smuggling people are profiting. You're promoting that.
Criminals profit, and once they realize some people have done it successfully, you just invite tens of thousands and millions more, because why wouldn't you? If I was living in a poor country and I had the opportunity to go to Europe and live there, why wouldn't I do that? It's totally understandable. You wouldn't demonize these people, but the other problem that Europe has got is the amount of violence and attacks of various kinds, because not everyone who's come in has come in with good intentions. Whereas Australia has been a little better at being able to control for that relative to the Europeans. So I think Europe needs to get kind of serious about its border security. That just having endless waves of migrants into Europe is not going to. They've already taken too many, and it's not sustainable. And I'm not saying this because I'm hating on all migrants and things like that. It's purely just a numbers game. And as I said, if you believe that diversity is your strength, that all of that, you should put down on paper how much diversity and what is the strength and how do you measure it and how do you know if you're tracking against it? Because that will give you something to work with. If you go, okay, we want to have greater cultural diversity in our society, that's fine. That's not, not an unlaudable goal, but you should put limits around that. And I think particularly for small population countries in Northern and Eastern Europe. So Lithuania, fewer than 3 million. Estonia, 1.3. I think Latvia has 1.9. Very small
They're
country.
tiny.
And migration. How are they going to absorb these people? And we're not talking. They're not all immigrants, but like these are indigenous societies living in that region, whose culture has evolved over thousands of years. I mean, Australia, as I said, culture is evolving rapidly.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, like, what's the price you'll pay for diversity? And I guess, like, I think back to, the attacks in France, like, they're quite significant. And, like, the last time like, where they labeled terrorism attack in Australia, do you remember the Lint Cafe?
I do. In Australia, yeah.
Yeah. And that was, I guess, a scare for many people.
So there was for those that don't know, in probably 10 years ago now, there was a hostage situation at a cafe in Sydney. I mean, that guy seemed like he was sort of a crazy guy. Like,
in general,
he was trying to attach himself to the whole Islamist ideology, probably just because he felt isolated and things like that. So he didn't go and train in Pakistan or anything like that. He was just some local guy who was trying to make a name for himself, and that all went really badly. I think that the Australian police were trying to be nice and humane, which understandable. They didn't want anyone to lose their lives, but they could have dealt with him very quickly. They just didn't until he forced the issue. So it kind of ended tragically. But I mean, that's probably the most significant event. Also, our intelligence agencies have been very good at thwarting these things. Like, there have been plenty of plots, and every week or so we find a new plot has been uncovered. So our agencies have been very good at finding, detecting, and stopping potential threats. So in that sense, we've also been lucky. Like, if it wasn't for our security agencies, and I've criticized those agencies for all kinds of reasons, and they all have problems and everything. But one thing that they have done successfully well is keep us safe. So that's good.
Yeah. Nice. All right, let's change topic here. Crispin, what role do I have to play if I buy a Chinese phone? Because there was a comment out there that says, I'm just an average guy. Like, I love Xiaomi phones because they're high value.
Yep.
And why would the CCP want to know my information? I'm boring. I'm average.
Okay, so there are multiple layers to this. First of all, if you have your data tracked, analyzed, disseminated within a authoritarian kind of regime like the CCP, even if you are like a normal person, that data will still be used for perverse means. So you'll probably only be, let's say you're in Lithuania, you'll probably only be 1 degree of separation away from significant government officials. So if everything you're doing on your phone is tracked, they will know like who you're interacting with, who is the other phones in your area. Like, if you go and sit down at a cafe, where they are at any one time, they'll know exactly your search behaviors, who you're speaking to on the phone, obviously where you're traveling on a day-to-day commute, and they'll plug all that into an artificial intelligence system, for data analytics, and they'll make predictions about you that you don't know yourself. I know in Australia they were even starting to talk about giving people discounts on their car insurance if they eat enough spaghetti, right? Because I know that sounds insane, but because like they go, okay, well, people who go to the supermarket and buy these types of groceries tend to have fewer accidents in these ways, and therefore they can do a risk-based analysis on that basis. So even if you yourself as an individual are not being affected by what the Chinese are doing, it is still being used for the purposes of harming your country. They'll know, exactly where people's vulnerabilities are, where their secrets are, the sorts of things that they don't want other people to find out, the sorts of things that might create blackmail. And we all have secrets, right? We all have things that we wouldn't want everybody in the world to know, particularly people that want to do us harm. Okay, so even if you yourself don't have anything to worry about, your data is still being used to hurt your country. Okay, that's the first point. The second point is you don't know what things are going to be like in 5, 10, 15 years. I mean, you don't know where you'll be or what you're doing 10 years from now. If we look at how many people are being cancelled in the West for things they said 10 years ago on social media.
Dude,
okay?
people in history have died are getting cancelled.
Yeah, now it's kind of weird that these things even show up, right? Like, who is going through someone's social media behavior 11 years ago, okay? When they were a nobody, before they ever ran for office and no one had any reason to.
It is really.
When they were an ordinary person, just like you.
It is really cruel that some people, scroll people's Twitter feeds, because Twitter is like, what it is. You're not the best person on Twitter. And if you're an average person and prior to, becoming a politician, you say dumb stuff all the time.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. And so just remember how values and things could change in the next 10, 15 years. And if there is an organization run by a state power that is saving everything that you do, you won't remember having done any of this stuff, but it might just come up out of nowhere. And it may not even be anyone searching for it. So, for example, let's say your sister becomes a prominent politician. And that person is outspoken against the Chinese Communist Party. Well, some journalist in the West may just find something pop up in their search results, right? That had nothing, they weren't even looking for it, which involves all of your social media history. And why? Because the Chinese Communist Party put it there. Okay. So then they do a story about, a scandal involving your family, which really impacts your sister's political career. And all of this happens without anybody knowing where it all began. Like, it just began because a journalist stumbled over information. Of course, they want to hide their sources, even though their source was like a Google search, because the algorithm had been manipulated by a state power.
But where does this extend, right? Because like every phone is made in China, or all the parts, really. So,
well, there is someone gave an example where, and the supply chain issues are extraordinary. So people were talking about the dependency on pharmaceuticals being made in China when the pandemic hit, and like this whole issue becoming much clearer. So there was someone who wrote like a future war novel in which the paint used on a pilot's helmet had embedded in it like secret microchips, right? So they'd make a pilot's helmet in China. They would paint it. That paint had a secret kind of tracking mechanism, and that was being used for targeting of missiles. So like pilots flying in a war with China had their helmets, with a tracking mechanism that no one had ever thought to look up, right? And so enemy pilots would just fire off missiles tracking the helmets of enemy pilots. Now that might seem like a bit out there, but that's the kind of level of like technological thinking is happening in a covert way. The fact that China is embedded in the supply chain of everything, they can use quite inventive techniques to be harmful to others. And that's why Australia, for example, was like the first country in the world to not allow Huawei into the 5G network, because Australia knew that, much like the Lithuanians are learning, that any technology that the Chinese put in will have backdoor systems and little things that are not easy to detect, things that we may not have even thought of. That would allow the Chinese government to access that data. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right, Charlene, that the fact that the Chinese government are embedded not just in Xiaomi phones or Vivo or Huawei, but also, every other, Samsung, Apple, in the chipsets and things like that of various PCs and things around the world.
I'm sure if you take my phone and go to China, it will be activated to be tracked by CCP because that's the arrangement, right? Like,
yes, but that's like, that'll definitely be true. If you hook into a Chinese network, then the Chinese will control whatever it is you see and do on their networks, right? But that's kind of true for most countries.
Yeah.
And that's why VPNs and things are so important. The other thing I found really interesting the last few days is China banning all cryptocurrencies. I'm curious as to what that is likely to do to the crypto markets.
But why? It's fully transparent.
Good point. Yeah. So no, I mean, I think with the Chinese government crackdown on tech giants, the whole issue with the Evergrande company, the property developer that's going under, I think that foreign investors are going to be increasingly reluctant to build factories and things in China. So over time, we will see a disaggregation from China in terms of the production of various critical infrastructure. I think for the Americans in particular, we'll look at all the dual use technologies that are out there, things that are used for commercial purposes, but also could be used for military purposes or critical infrastructure, and make new rules regarding the production and distribution of those supply chains. I mean, one of the things that people used to say about the US China and why there could never be a conflict between the two countries is how embedded not just they are in terms of trade and finance, but in terms of the supply chains of construction, right? So you'll have the IP in Silicon Valley, and then you'll have like the mining in some other part of the world, and then you'll have the smelting and reprocessing in some other country, and then you'll have the manufacturing in some other country, and these supply chains being so enmeshed that conflict between the US and China would be so devastating to the world economy that they would make conflict unthinkable. But what we're actually seeing is as the politics heats up between the two countries, those supply chains are pulling apart on one level, government directed, because they're like, look, we don't want to have these vulnerabilities, and on the other level, just straight intelligent investment decision making by commercial entrepreneurs that say, look, it's a big risk if I set up my factory in China. The Chinese Communist Party might just take it over. There might be some political issue between the US and China. I'm much better building that factory in Argentina or building it in South Africa rather than building it in China. So I think the Chinese economy is going to really suffer in terms of its growth trajectory over the next 10, 15 years. Not so much that it goes into recession, because it has a significant gap to do that. And also, it also creates a bit of a geopolitical risk. And I haven't talked about this. I'll do this perhaps in a future video if it's relevant. But once China apprehends its peak, that's when I think we've got the most danger, right? Because then if its window is closing to kind of seek regional hegemony to try and have primacy in Asia, that's when we'll see potential military conflict. So it'll be that point where the workforce declines quickly because of the aging population, where divestment from the Chinese economy has slowed the economy down to a crawl, where other countries in the region, such as India, start to catch up. That's when I think we'll start to see real risk in Taiwan and other places.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and I feel like, I don't know, do you find that Western countries divesting from China, like, does that have an impact on the employment rate?
Well, it depends on the industry. So manufacturing, it definitely does, because if we think about the American Midwest and what got Trump elected and all of that originally was the massive outflow of jobs from American factories. 70,000 factories closing across the United States in the space of 5 years, many of those opening up in China. If you look at the graph of manufacturing jobs in China, it goes like this. The rest of the world kind of tanked. Well, as people stop opening factories in China and start repatriating them to the United States and other places, Europe, that opens up a huge middle class kind of job opportunity where wages will increase as there's competition for manufacturing jobs. So in that sense, there will be. There are other roles where that'll be less likely because a lot of these come from government investment. So I would say the construction sector is a big one where Australia, for example, exports huge commodities to China. That's what created our economic relationship dependency in the first place. Well, with the collapse of Evergrande, which is their second largest property developer, also demonstrated a high degree of derivative kind of exposure over leveraging in other parts of the property sector in China. We can see construction likely coming to a screaming halt. It's not like that will be picked up elsewhere. So anything that's basically where individuals like to store their money, in China's case, it was all in property. And those things are not, those things are national based. They're not international based. So our commodity exports will be hit, I think, for the foreseeable future, particularly since the political relationship between Australia and China is such that even as the Chinese economy picks up, they will seek to source their commodities elsewhere rather than purchase them from Australia. So it varies. Manufacturing, yes. Commodities and construction, no.
Well, I think it does open up new opportunities, right, for other countries, smaller countries, to get new economies, and so that they'll be able to lift their population out of poverty.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, the Estonian, and I said we'll do a video on it this week. The Estonian tech sector, getting involved in tech entrepreneurship is a great opportunity. I mean, China is cracking down on what they see as non-value-adding asset companies. So China doesn't value ride-sharing apps and things like that. What they want is semiconductors and hardware manufacture, and that's what the Chinese government actually sees as adding value to the nation state.
What do you mean? Why not ride-sharing apps?
Well, because they don't. The Communist Party doesn't support business for its own sake. Right? It supports it to the extent that they see it advancing the goals of the Communist Party as a whole, particularly under Xi Jinping. So, for whatever reason, Xi Jinping values hard manufacturing. So, things like new chipsets, new technology, new hardware, new kind of mining equipment, all these kinds of engineering innovations, but things that kind of just connect people online, social media, streaming services, those kinds of things. I think he sees them as threats to first of all his power base, because it can create alternative celebrity kind of things and things like that, and also
can't have the Korean pop stars on TV anymore.
Yes, and he doesn't see ride sharing necessarily, for example, as something adding to the economy as a whole, right?
Okay.
So I think obviously it's somewhat narrow view, but it does present a lot of opportunity for other countries that want to improve their connectivity and allow that to grow. So people should pay attention to what the CCP is clamping down on and realising the opportunity that presents for others to come into the market.
Yeah. Okay. So the answer to this question is we do have a role to play indirectly, even if it doesn't affect our immediate surroundings. We're part of it too.
Very much so.
Another topic this week is your friend has published a book recently about the US and China relations. And sorry, can you remind me what the title is?
The Strategy of Denial.
Strategy of Denial, yeah. I found it really interesting of how he explained the role of the Baltic and the US, because like I never really thought about that. Like, if the US are so caught up in war with China, do they have capacity to protect other nations?
Yes. So this is one of the most serious kind of videos we've done. Elbridge Colby, for those that don't know, he's the author of the 2018 US National Security Strategy. He is the Pentagon's most accomplished military strategist, in my view. And his new book basically says that America's strategy, and that kind of video we're doing about the 100 years of Estonia-Australia relations, the rule-based international order, he doesn't do that. He splits an arrow. He says the US policy should be to deny China hegemony over Asia. The way to do that is to prevent China capturing and fortifying Taiwan, essentially. Right?
Yeah.
And he goes into considerable detail as to the means by which that should be achieved, and also is extremely candid about the limits of American power, that the United States does not have the ability to do everything everywhere. Its unipolar moment has well and truly expired.
What do you mean unipolar moment? What are you talking about?
Okay,
There?
so after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the NATO alliance went right across Europe to the Russian border, including all of the Baltic states. There was a belief that the Washington Consensus, the liberal democracies, would spread unfettered across the world, and that the American hegemonic power would make the United States the greatest, most powerful country for hundreds of years to come, with no one being able to compete with it, right? That unipolar moment being that the United States was so powerful, so much stronger than its nearest rival, that it basically ruled the world, right? And that is no longer the case. China is definitely a peer competitor of the United States. There are other centers of power emerging as well. America has spent a lot of blood and treasure in the Middle East, exhausted itself in all kinds of serious ways, is domestically quite tribal and contested at home. So the US is now a very, very powerful country, still has the greatest military, but doesn't have the power to do everything everywhere. Now, what Bridge says in his book is that American objective in Europe militarily is to prevent any one power dominating all of Europe, which during the Cold War, of course, was the Soviet Union, and preventing them from moving across into Western Europe. Well, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the spread of NATO, well, there is no risk of any country dominating all of Europe for the foreseeable future. And in fact, NATO could be a lot smaller than it presently is, and still have that military preponderance. However,
what would motivate Russia to?
Well, that's what I was getting to. So the what Bridge is saying is that the expansion of NATO to the Russian border, which is very, very far away from Western Europe, you're talking Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, flat territory, only a few hundred kilometers wide, backed by the Baltic Sea, a place where 3 major invasions of Russia took place, that Russia has a strong interest in capturing the Baltic states. Okay, but the NATO alliance is clear: an attack on one is an attack on all. Every country in NATO must respond to any foreign aggression. And of course, while the United States does see the Baltic states as their most loyal allies, the closest kind of in terms of culture and values, they also recognize that there are limits to American power and the ability to prevent a Russian invasion of the Baltic states. And this would particularly be true if China invades Taiwan. If China invades Taiwan, then that will be all-consuming for America. The US has to project power over 10,000 kilometers of Pacific Ocean. That means air and sea power. And embroiled in a quagmire in East Asia, Russia could, according to Bridge, be opportunistic and invade the Baltic states and present Western Europe with a fait accompli. To say, okay, well, we have invaded and captured that territory. If you wish to retake this territory, you're going to have to do an amphibious assault against the Baltic states at tremendous loss of life. And, I've done 2 videos recently. One was on Sweden's kind of new security arrangement with the Nordic countries. And that video explains in detail what the war planning is around that and why Sweden has to go in that direction. And then, of course, the video from on Bridges' new book, which hitherto would have been highly classified, this assessment that the United States may not be able to defend the Baltic in a number of critical scenarios. Now,
is it classified because I don't know.
It would have been until you wouldn't have heard a senior Pentagon official saying this openly.
Being like the US is weak.
Well, yes. I mean, this is why Bridge is so penetrating, right? Is that he has a clear-eyed assessment of America's strengths and weaknesses and strategic priorities, and the resources need to achieve specified military objectives. And one of those vulnerabilities is America defending far northern Eastern Europe against a major power who's fighting on its periphery, right?
Is there a greater risk when you highlight that issue, like with a bigger target, or does it bring awareness to bring the other Western countries on board, Western European countries?
No, I think that this needs to be said.
Okay.
That you can't beat truth, right? and the Russians know this, the Swedes know this.
Mm.
The only people that kind of get left in the dark are probably the Baltic states themselves, because what you see is, people saying the same thing over again. We're absolutely committed to our allies and things, but the resources aren't moving in the direction to give credibility to that. What this does say is to the Germans, to the French, to the Brits to a lesser degree, is like, you must, absolutely must, increase your military cooperation with the Baltic states, increase your military deployments on their territory. In the German case in particular, they must dramatically increase their defense spending, because at the moment there's some 35,000 American troops based in Germany. That will not be the case in 5 years' time. And so the Germans have to actually invest in their own defense, not just rely on the American taxpayer to protect this region. And what Bridge says is defending the Baltic states is possible, absolutely possible, given the fact that Germany's GDP is like 3 times that of Russia. If it only spent, 2% of GDP on defense, then it would actually be able to defend the Baltic states. So having these kind of candid discussions, no, it doesn't increase Russian threat to the Baltic. I think that threat was already there.
Yeah.
It does light a fire under the Western Europeans, though, to pull their own weight and actually protect Europe. The Europeans should be defending Europe. They're wealthy, they're powerful, they should be able to do that.
That's true. Yeah. Europe, defend Europe. As weird as that sounds. We also have a comment here from Red Mint. They say, I'm doing my dissertation on geopolitics of Russia in the Baltic region, and this channel is helping to give me a really good foundation to build from. Thank you for the content and keep it up.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's kind of cool.
It is.
Didn't you use someone's PhD dissertation for the history video?
Oh, yeah, for the history video, yes, Dr. Andre. But on this comment, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of background, and what you might want to look at is the US withdrawal from the INF Treaty, and how there was an evolution in terms of the attitude towards Russian missile manufacturing. So there's a thing called Iskander missile, Iskander, and it was that violation of the INF Treaty, basically in response to Russia's recognition that the new kind of front of hostilities would be across the Baltic Sea, and therefore Russia needed missiles that violated that treaty. And also how it gave America the excuse to withdraw from the treaty because they are dealing with China and India and other countries, and they no longer believe that they can abide by it. So these sorts of things have evolved not in a vacuum, and also, of course, Sweden's recognition of its own vulnerability. So yeah, I'd love to hear where you're going with that dissertation, and if you have any specific questions on that, please let us know. I'm sure we can discuss it. It's a vexing strategic issue defending the Baltic states. What I would like to see longer term is, and this is longer term, not right now, would be for NATO to be dissolved, replaced with another kind of pan-European security architecture, one that included Russia as a member, and as part of that, guaranteed to a much stronger degree Baltic security, the territorial integrity. I mean, one thing that set everyone back was the dismembering of Ukraine, because there was a 1994 agreement between the United States and Russia and the Ukraine that the Ukraine would give up all of its nuclear weapons. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, something like 4,000 or 5,000 nuclear weapons were left over in Ukraine. And so Ukraine, declaring independence, inherited this vast nuclear arsenal, and they agreed to give them up in exchange for this agreement that it would guarantee their territorial integrity. Now, of course, that was set aside by Russia when they seized Crimea in eastern Ukraine. And other countries don't want that to happen to them. So it really creates a barrier for improving relations with Russia, because they will remember how they had this agreement, they gave up their nuclear weapons, and Russia then kind of reneged on the deal. So whatever happens to kind of replace NATO, whatever kind of pan-European architecture would be involved, must involve a high degree of hard power deployed on Lithuanian, Estonian, and Latvian soil to not just provide paper guarantees, but real guarantees as to their security. And in exchange, we'll gradually improve relations with Russia, because one of the strategic things that Bridge talks about in his book, and I concur with this, and I've talked about this in other forums, is that ultimately it's not in Russia's interest to be the proxy of China. Like Russia should have its own foreign policy. I'm sure deep down in the Russian soul, they would prefer to be part of the victorious West rather than kind of a China slave, which is where they'll end up. Let's say America gets pushed out of the Pacific, is no longer a strong country in East Asia. China succeeds in becoming dominant over Asia. Well, that is the most dynamic region in the world. That will create a absolute dependency relationship between Russia and China, and Russia will essentially be doing whatever China wants. Now, if they don't want to do that, they need to improve their relationship with the West. And one of the
Is it so sour? Is it really that sour?
Oh, it's incredibly toxic. I mean, Trump got elected with the promise of improving relations with Russia. He said, "Look, I'll deal with Putin, and we'll make common cause in places like Syria," and really worked to improve relations. But domestically, he couldn't, because there was the whole Russiagate thing, the Mueller investigation. Everyone in Washington saying, Russia stole the election. They couldn't believe that Trump had won in the first place. And so the Russiagate hysteria in Washington made it impossible for the United States to improve relations with Russia. And now, the Baltic states were obviously very concerned about Trump's election, because they saw that there were some people that were very happy, some people were very unhappy. So the Israelis were very happy because Trump was very pro-Israel, unlike Obama. And the Baltic states was very unhappy because they thought that their interests would be sold out to Putin because Trump was promising to improve relations with Russia. I'm of a kind of a third way. I say, look, you improve relations with Russia with the best interests of the Baltic states at heart. You make sure that the Estonian officials, the Latvian officials, the Lithuanian establishment, that they're in the room during the negotiations, that things aren't decided for them, and that their interests are absolutely protected in any arrangement that you do make with Russia, with the ultimate goal of pulling Russia out of Beijing's orbit. Okay. And that is possible to do, but it requires a bit of free air. So, Russia has to stop making provocations. They've got to start winding back their support for Lukashenko, working a sort of a transition arrangement in Belarus, a bit of free oxygen, if you like. If you've got another kind of crisis every week with Russia, it makes it very, very difficult to work things out. And in the context of doing that, ask the Baltic leaders, what would it take for you to feel secure with Russia long term, and be serious about that. Be like, okay, how many troops on Baltic soil? What guarantees from Russia? Those sorts of things. So you've got a starting point for negotiation, and then you work with the Russians on that. Because ultimately, if Russia ties itself to China, because it's given no other option, or because they just make geopolitical error, that is hugely destabilizing for Europe long term. I mean, there is. If we look at how much pressure Beijing is putting on Moscow just over the Lithuanian Tibet issue, which I've talked about a lot, imagine if China was at war with the United States, how much pressure would be on Moscow to invade the Baltic? Because Russia would want, because China would want that. They would be like, Russia, go invade the Baltic so you can distract the Americans for us.
But it wouldn't be in their interest. Russia's like, I don't.
Well, it's not in their. This is funny. The Tibet, the Taiwan thing isn't in their interest. So Beijing is putting pressure on Moscow to cut trade with Lithuania over Taiwan. That they have no bone in the fight. But Russia does have an interest in controlling its near abroad, making NATO look like a paper tiger, seizing the Baltic states. They would get something out of that if they did that successfully. And that's a real, if not a rhetorical, if that's definitely not guaranteed. But what would be even more in Russia's interest is if they felt secure with the Baltic states, if their relationship improved with Eastern Europe over time, that the Baltic states themselves felt absolutely confident that their freedom, democracy, rule of law, sovereignty is endowed with credible force, and for Russia to feel able to maneuver itself out of China's dependency relationship. Because once China takes over Asia, Russia is incredibly vulnerable, and if Russia doesn't want to be the next target, then they would be doing anything Beijing said. And if you think about fewer than 6 million people are in the entire Russian Far East. Vladivostok was seized from China during the Century of Humiliation. On Chinese map, Vladivostok still has its Chinese names. So Russia could be dismembered by China if China wanted, and thus the way for Russia to prevent that is to improve relations with the West. But at the moment, this whole American obsession with demonizing Russia is making it very, very difficult. Russia itself is doing a lot of things to make that a kind of easy thing to do. And the Baltic states, all the while, are fearful legitimately for their own security and sovereignty. I mean, all of these problems need to be solved at once, and there needs to be some radical diplomacy to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I was just kind of like, so many things all happening at once. But it doesn't sound impossible. It just sounds hard.
Yeah, I mean, the starting point is what's best for the Baltic countries. So how will they feel secure?
Yeah.
And if we can answer that question in a serious way, then we can at least start that process. I mean, the anti-Russia feeling in the Baltic runs really deep.
Yeah.
And they were occupied for an enormous period of time, tremendous hardship imposed upon these countries. And the Russians aren't really recognizing the harm that they caused. That said, I don't think this is like a permanent state of affairs. Younger people in the Baltic states don't have the same memory. There are significant Russian minorities in these countries, which contribute to Baltic life, and it is possible that over time you could have an improved relationship, but there has to be based upon proper security, proper respect, and real defensibility of the Baltic region. Like that needs to be put first.
Yeah.
And after we can kind of articulate that, then we can start the journey of warming ties. Hopefully, it is not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then on the same vein as war is submarines.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this past week,
while now,
like Australia pulled their agreement with France to make our submarines locally in South Australia without telling the French, which is just...
Yes. So, I mean, obviously, everybody in the world knows that Australia is going to procure nuclear-powered submarines from the United States and Great Britain, jettisoning its $90 billion contract with France in the process. Now, I do want to take a moment, and a lot of people have been sort of defending this decision and being uppity about it. And although it's strategically the correct choice, the way it was handled was incredibly damaging to the French. And I as an Australian, I'm deeply embarrassed by the way that this was managed. I think France, if I was in Paris, I would be deeply hurt by the way in which they were kind of betrayed in a way. And I don't think the Australians did it maliciously. I think it was just with great neglect. Because the French have their strategy for the Pacific region. They still have a lot of territory in the Pacific, like French Polynesia, New Caledonia, places like that. And they wanted to deepen their relationship with Australia to help shore up their strategic position in the Pacific, and would have contributed to regional security alongside the United States in that effort, until such time as they got stabbed in the back like this. So I want to just take a moment to say that, and that Australia does need to find a way to make it up to Paris, because this was not the right way to go about it.
No. And they got the ambassador actually left Australia.
Yeah, I mean, the ambassador will be back. I think this was more, registering just how angry they were, and I can think up ways. I wouldn't sort of mention it here yet, but I can think up ways in which Australia could, restore trust and that camaraderie with the French, which we should do. That said, strategically, it was the correct decision to go with the nuclear-powered submarines.
Why is that?
Well, because Australia has tremendous territory to cover. Nuclear-powered submarines, their advantage is they have enormous range, right? They can travel underwater for months at a time. What you do is you basically seal the entire fuel rods in the reactor core for the entire life cycle of the boat. So you only have to fuel it once.
Wow.
And those things can run for decades. So that is a very good thing. The drawback is, and we don't talk about it enough, Australia waters are very shallow in our surrounding area, in our continental shelf. And so our submarines are not very large, typically speaking, because we need to keep them, at a small enough size that they can operate effectively without being detected in our little region. One of the advantage of French submarines is they were within that range, and their Barracuda nuclear-powered submarines are the smallest nuclear submarines in the world.
Okay.
So that would have been perfectly fine if we had gone with French nuclear-powered submarines. The fact that we're going with sort of American designs implies strongly that the submarines that we procure will not be operating sort of in the Marcus Straits in our region. They'll be sent up to Northeast Asia where they'll be operating presumably against the Chinese.
Yeah, near Taiwan.
Yeah, so that's why the Americans are so excited by it, because they see an increasing collective defense where Australia has the ability to project power into Northeast Asia and to contribute meaningfully to joint operations in the region that America really wants. But nuclear-powered submarines, kind of a no-brainer for a country the size of Australia, maritime environment. We really need to, as a culture, need to move away from like the Anzac spirit, because that's all land forces. We're an island continent. We should be focusing on naval power and air power.
Yeah.
And we need to create new myths to kind of support that. In that sense, it makes sense. Now, people have been critical because they're afraid of the proliferation risk, whether or not it will result in Australia getting nuclear weapons.
Will it?
No, but it will push us a lot closer to that mark. See, where it becomes really dangerous, we will be the only country in the world that have nuclear-powered submarines with no nuclear weapons. And that's because the fuel rods you put into nuclear reactors for submarines are highly enriched, weapons-grade material. So if Australia was to open it up and steal some of that material, we could put that in a bomb and create a nuclear weapon pretty much straight away. So that creates, and also because nuclear propulsion is one of the most secretive technologies in the world. Like the American government protects those secrets more than any other. The safeguards are highly limited. It's not like the International Atomic Energy Agency are going to be able to go in and open up our reactors and measure all the material that's in there, and but they won't be given that kind of access. There'll come a point where safeguards will be ceased and the operational security, the secrecy will take over. And so that's another proliferation risk as well. There'll be limited safeguards. And none of this has been a problem, because the countries that had nuclear powered submarines in the past were all nuclear weapon states, and therefore no one really cared that much. But Australia, not having nuclear weapons, but having nuclear propulsion, is another kettle of fish. And it's not a big step. Like if you are using nuclear material for military purposes, which is what we are, then it's not that far. Now, I actually think that there are a lot of advantages to this, in that our nuclear engineering, nuclear science, all of that will be immeasurably enhanced by the need to operate and maintain nuclear-powered submarines. And that will hopefully allow us to branch into other areas of the nuclear fuel cycle. I'm not talking nuclear weapons, but things like fuel fabrication, spent storage facilities, reprocessing facilities. That will actually really help the region in terms of nuclear power, right? So once Australia has gotten used to having nuclear-powered submarines, and nuclear is no longer the big boogeyman that is used as a political wedge, other countries in the region will be able to send their spent fuel to Australia for reprocessing. So I'll give you one clear example. At the moment, the regime is that if you have nuclear power, you're responsible for all the nuclear waste that you produce. Right? And a lot of these countries, they're not very wealthy. They're not geologically stable. They might have some political risk. Things could happen to this material, right? It could create contamination. Well, if you sent all of that material to Australia, one of the most geologically stable continents in the world, and we did all the reprocessing, we can recycle those into new fuel rods and send them back to their home countries. We would make a fortune out of it. It would create a lot of sort of stability and environmental security for the region. These sorts of things. But at the moment, it's too politically difficult to get that up and running. If we already had all of those skills and we were running military propulsion, then we might actually have that be able to do some of those things. So economically, it's a good idea. Environmentally, it's a good idea. Strategically, it's a good idea. The timelines are a bit crazy. Like the idea that we won't get a submarine until 2040. I think the story's all going to be over by then. So
It needs to be off the shelf.
Yes, you've nailed it, right? What we need to do is buy the submarines, and if we need like American crews to work alongside Australian crews, so be it. We can build up those skills over time, and then by 2040, we should be able to maintain all the submarines and all of the job creation and infrastructure and all of that. You know, over the course of the life cycle of the submarine, that will be that will be more than make up for not having built them here. If we can actually get them to Australia in the next year or two, that's way, way better than building them from scratch. And then all of the knowledge and know-how and skills that we develop as a consequence of maintaining these submarines for the next generation of submarines, we will be able to build those ourselves. So get them off the shelf, get them quickly. But there is the drawback that American nuclear-powered submarines are very, very large. There's also a question mark over what we would be using them for specifically. So
Taiwan? No.
Yes, but it's kind of interesting. Diesel electric submarines, which is what we have previously had, they're more for, historically, been used more for anti-shipping, which is kind of what we would use them for. We would want to stop an invasion. We wouldn't want to stop supply ships. So they're out there sinking convoys, right? Nuclear-powered attack submarines that do not have nuclear weapons are usually doing one of two things. One, they are protecting nuclear missile submarines, right? So let's say you've got your nuclear deterrent and it's out there in the Pacific and you're just swimming them around. Well, often they're escorted by other submarines to protect them from potential attack, okay? And so they're running escorts with other subs. Now, you need nuclear-powered submarines to do that because you need to be able to keep up with the thing that you're protecting. So that's the first thing. And the other is to destroy enemy nuclear weapon submarines, to go out and hunt and destroy them to prevent them from launching nuclear weapons against your country. Now, Australia's nuclear-powered submarines presumably wouldn't be doing either of those things. So it would be like this kind of weird situation where they'd be used for anti-shipping, but that's not really what they're built for. So that remains to be seen. That'll be one of the things, certainly espionage. But there'll be some other strange things as well. The question mark over whether or not they'll have their own ballistic missiles, so conventional missiles for land targets and things like that. That's another reason nuclear-powered submarines are used. So either we adapt it for new missions, or we become so integrated in the American system that we're escorting their nuclear missile subs and things around, which would be crazy levels of integration. Like, you know, Australia knowing we're all American nuclear weapons submarines are flying, like that would be a big step. So we'll wait and see. But we saw a movie.
Yes, we saw a movie. Red October. Hunt for Red October?
Yes, that's right.
October. 1990s film with Sean Connery and
Alec Baldwin.
And I didn't realize, right? But man, they made a submarine look so cool. So it's all male cast.
Yes, there are no female characters. There's like the wife and daughter in the first 1 minute of the film, and they have no role beyond the first two scenes, whatever, just to say goodbye, basically to show that the main character has a family.
We didn't even get to see the family again after that, actually. Now looking back at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all male cast couldn't be made in 2021, but that's okay. It was interesting. Yeah, I've never seen it, and it kind of gave me a bit of perspective of how a submarine works.
Yeah, it's one of the better submarine films out there, and sure, like submarines are, I think, will be the 21st century. I mean, we talk about the kind of U-boat war and the Second World War as being like a significant part of that conflict, and it was to a degree, but I think submarines are going to be the most important military platform in any conflict with China by far. Also, unmanned vehicles. We obviously don't have that in the 1990s, but they do show the difficulty in 1990. You know, if you don't have like effective tracking and everything like that, doing everything navigation by maths.
Yeah, it was so interesting of like, you know, how they basically were doing maths. So that's okay, they're timing it and it's like, okay, turn. And it's like, don't turn. Like, what are you doing? I'm going to hit something. And then they use a map that they've just drawn.
Yeah. And you don't see it. Like you're in a metal cube.
Yeah.
And you're just hoping
for the best.
what's outside. Like you can't see anything. Like at least if you're on a plane or something, you've got the cockpit, you can kind of see right outside. But no, you couldn't see a thing. And
so it featured a Scottish Lithuanian.
yes, so Marco Remius, the captain of the Red October, played by Sean Connery, and one of the reasons why Jack Ryan is convinced that he is trying to defect is that he's a Lithuanian, not a Russian, and therefore may not be as loyal to the Soviet Union as perhaps someone from Moscow. And I mean, it's kind of interesting that the whole premise of Jack Ryan's... So Jack Ryan is a character created by Tom Clancy, writer that wrote a lot of war books. Jack Ryan is, a CIA analyst. And what he bases this on is pretty thin.
Yeah,
right?
It is very thin.
So the plot and the way things are explained and done is really good. Like they do cover most of their bases. You could probably find a plot hole here and there, but not not the standards that you're supposed to. You're not suspending your belief completely, right? So kind of a tight, convoluted plot in the sense that obviously it's adapted from a novel, so they had to get in a lot of bits and pieces. You really have to follow it. But what Jack Ryan bases his premises on is quite narrow. It is really interesting though, like to think about what the American decision-making process would be. So imagine you're the president of the US, and you're told that there is this super secret, really silent submarine where they're sailing heavily towards the American coastline with, dozens of ICBM nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, right? And they might be defecting, right? They might not, and they might be attacking. And do you, as the president, allow them to come potentially within range to fire their missiles? It's very hard to...
I just love that scene where he was talking about they had the relations with the ambassador, and it was like, okay, I gotta tell you something. We've actually lost the submarine.
Yeah.
And then there's another scene, they're like, you lost another submarine? Oh my god. So this is a rescue mission? Oh.
Yes, yeah. The Americans dunking on the Soviets. Yeah. Look, it is a great movie, and a powerful cast, like Sam Neill is in there, James Earl Jones, that all the characters are strong characters in their own way. Like I couldn't think of anyone that's particularly stupid, right? Like you've got Captain Remius, who knows the Soviet tactics. You've got the captain of the USS ship, the submarine, the Los Angeles class. He's a good captain. You've got the people listening on the sonar. They're doing their job well. Like everyone does their job really well. There's no character that's like absolutely terrible at what they do, and that's really refreshing. They didn't need to make any character stronger at the expense of any other character, and I think that's a sign of good storytelling.
Yeah, although there were some again like plot holes, like that was super convenient how the captain was right there when he was about to push the button.
Oh yes, yes. They had fired off they dropped a torpedo, and he just walks up and presses the button to self-detonate. Yes, that was a convenient contrivance. So there were a couple of spots where things happened because they needed the plot to happen.
Yeah,
but they could have the thing about that is they could have actually explained those things if they'd done it as a plan, right? Like if he'd been standing there at the beginning before they dropped the torpedo, it's like, all right, we're going to drop a torpedo, and you're just going to, sit there and do your thing, and I'm going to do my thing. And then then you would know ahead of time.
Yeah. But the suspense, Crispin, I think that's the suspense. I'm like, oh wait, he's there. Like, we're safe.
Yeah.
And I love the scene where so they didn't know that the Chiefs were going to defect, right? So they got all the people off the boat because of that leakage, radio.
The nuclear leak.
The nuclear leak. So and so they're on the boat, and like because the war's happening, they're like, they're fighting against the Americans, like not knowing that they're trying to negotiate and trying to get onto the boat to be safe, but it's actually the Russians against the Russians.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, so there are some other good Jack Ryan movies.
Mm.
We'll probably if you enjoy them, there are other ones that are even a bit easier to follow. We can watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we watched that just because of the latest submarine news, and
Yeah. Best submarine movie. I rate it. It's the only submarine movie I've probably watched, but yeah.
well, watch it if you haven't seen it. It is a good film.
Yeah.
But you do have to pay attention because like the plot it's based on a book, so it's the plot moves quickly.
But yeah, okay. Well, that's all the time for that we had today. Any questions, any feedback, please leave them down below. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Our tribe is growing. Well, I don't want to rip that off. That's a historical thing, but yes, it is.
I like it. Yeah,
yeah. Otherwise, stay safe and
ciao.